This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. President Obama is back from Europe, and former Ambassador Peter Galbraith says he's had a successful foreign policy. Political science professor Jan Leighley explains why the rich vote in greater numbers than the poor and what they vote for. And Bill Press talks with Senator Bernie Sanders on his new Veterans Affairs legislation. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Diplomat Peter Galbraith says President Obama's foreign policy has been successful, and that if Hillary Clinton becomes president, she'll enter office with more foreign policy experience than anyone in American history. And we say hello to Peter Galbraith, former ambassador to Croatia, the senior diplomatic fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, where his work focuses on Iraq, the greater Middle East, and conflict resolution and post-conflict reconstruction, specifically in the Balkans, Indonesia, Iraq, India, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia. Peter Galbraith, as always, we appreciate you joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Very nice to be with you again.
This is the 100th anniversary of World War I, which most historians believe was totally unnecessary and ushered in an era of mostly civilian casualties of war. Has diplomacy improved any in the past century?
Yes. The events, the kinds of war, the kinds of events that triggered World War I, and indeed wars before that, and World War II, primarily involved countries seeking to grab territory. And since 1945, with the adoption of the UN Charter, no country has successfully been able to take over the undisputed territory of another and keep it. And that is, in fact, one of the huge contributions of the United Nations and of the post-World War II order. The public opinion is much more engaged in foreign affairs, and therefore it generally operates as a force against militarism of the kind that contributed to the First World War. And frankly, but one of the things that led when the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians launched the First World War, and the other Europeans joined on the other side with a high degree of enthusiasm, they had no sense of the consequences. It's sure that the German Kaiser, the Austro-Hungarian emperor, and the Russian emperor would not have joined that war if they had imagined that the outcome would be the destruction of their empires, that the monarchies would be gone, that there would be a radically different social order. But they didn't think that way. Well, in the 21st century, and indeed for the latter part of the 20th century, we have a lot of people, voices out there that are engaged on foreign affairs and who are looking at the long-term consequences. And so we have a much more informed debate, and I think we're much more cautious than the European leaders who 100 years ago so cavalierly went to war.
Mm-hmm. How would you assess President Obama's foreign policy to date?
I think President Obama's been successful in his foreign policy, and he has, the first thing is he's restored America's standing in the world. I think we have to think back to how the United States was seen in 2008 at the end of the George Bush administration. At an all-time low. There was the U.S. had launched the war in Iraq, which was seen by the rest of the world as a violation of international law, and then we had conducted it with stunning incompetence. Our intelligence on the weapons of mass destruction was faulty. We had an occupation by a team of people who had no experience and who were stunningly incompetent, and Iraq descended into a civil war. The President Obama came in and saying that yes, we would work with the rest of the world, that we were respectful of international law. He got the U.S. out of Iraq. His esteem was so high that he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Some people might say that he won it prematurely. I think he felt he won it prematurely. But that was a sign of the respect that the world had, how rapidly he restored American prestige. Mm-hmm. He's made a major initiative to try to, reduce the number of nuclear weapons, to secure nuclear materials. This hasn't received as much attention as the crisis of the day, but it's really important for the long-term security of our planet. He had a successful intervention in Libya that got rid of the Gaddafi regime, protected the people of Benghazi against a genocide. And he's highlighted, perhaps not done as much as I would like, the problem of global warming, but that's much better than the previous administration that initially denied the problem, and then once they conceded the problem, still didn't want to do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There have been a few areas that I would be critical of. I think the surge in Afghanistan was his biggest mistake. And the problem was that we went ahead with a counterinsurgency strategy when we didn't have a partner in Afghanistan, and certainly not the highly mercurial Karzai. But the missteps, I think, have been few, and so it's a really solid record.
Mm-hmm. Now, while I have you assessing people, what about Hillary Clinton's legacy at the State Department and her future as a potential creator of U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I think most people would say that she was one of our most successful secretaries of state. She too played a big role in restoring America's prestige in the world, in rebuilding frayed alliances, strengthening alliances, in getting the international consensus to act on Libya. Her State Department was the one carrying out the nuclear negotiations that I referred to. She traveled widely, as with any Secretary of State. She had her share of crises, and I think she handled them skillfully. If she's elected president, and I hope she is, she will enter office with more foreign policy experience than any president in American history, perhaps by an order of two or three, a magnitude of 2 or 3. So that's going to be very impressive, and she would do so at a time when we really need that kind of experience.
We're speaking with Peter Galbraith, former ambassador to Croatia. He's the senior diplomatic fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. What's your outlook on the Middle East? Can the Obama administration do what has eluded previous administrations and achieve a two-state solution in Israel?
To get peace in between Israel and the Palestinians, it requires 3 things, and it requires an Israeli government that's willing to make peace. It requires a Palestinian Authority that has the political will to make peace, and an engaged American administration. And the trouble is that we've never had all 3 of those things at the same time. We know what the peace is going to look like. It is going to be a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank. It's going to have the same amount of territory that it would have had if Resolution 242 were implemented, but there will be territorial adjustments, which some territory, Israeli territory, perhaps in the Negev Desert, will be added to the Palestinian state, and some territory that is the most densely, has the largest number of settlers will be go to Israel. There'll be both countries will have Jerusalem as its capital. Probably there'll be a single building that will be the Palestinian capital in Jerusalem, and then the administrative center would be in Ramallah. We know all of this. So it's a question of the political will to get to that settlement. And I'm very admiring of the effort that Secretary Kerry is making to try to get there. He's been criticized for putting so much of his effort into that one goal and not knowing that he's going to succeed. Well, frankly, I think there's no harm in trying really hard to get a peace agreement, even if you don't succeed. The prestige of the United States is not damaged from really trying and not succeeding. It is that effort that and pushing the process along that's going to get us to the ultimate solution. As I said, an ultimate solution that we all know what it is.
What do you see as the most potentially dangerous flashpoint in the Middle East? Israel, Iran, or Syria?
Well, I think Iran is the most dangerous, but the one that I'm most optimistic about a solution. It's the most dangerous because, first, we obviously don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons. I don't think the Iranians intend to acquire nuclear weapons. I think they want the capability. But that for them to advance beyond what they have now would make the situation more dangerous. It runs the risk that other countries in the Persian Gulf area would get nuclear weapons, and in many ways I'd be more concerned about some of our supposed allies like Saudi Arabia and UAE with nuclear weapons than even with Iran. So we absolutely don't want the massive proliferation of nuclear weapons in that area. There's the danger of what would happen, the fallout if there was an Israeli or U.S. military strike. But I think the negotiations that are going forward are very positive. The Iranians seem serious about wanting to reach an agreement. We're not going to get the perfect agreement. We're not going to get Iran to agree to no enrichment, but I think we can get extensive verification of their nuclear facilities so that we will have 6 months to a year notice if they actually then tried to develop nuclear weapons. And the fact that we would have that time would enable us to take action to deter them, or if it had to be, military action to prevent it. So I think we can get a settlement that will provide excellent assurance that Iran will not develop nuclear weapons.
Okay, Peter Galbraith, former ambassador to Croatia, senior diplomatic fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. As always, sir, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to doing it again soon.
Anytime, and have a good day.
Thank you, you as well. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Voting expert Jan Leighley says it was great that President Obama got new voters out in 2012, but they won't do any good if they stay at home this year. And we'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
At last, our political leaders in Washington are taking action for low-wage workers and the middle class, striking a blow for America's historic value of economic fairness. Gosh, I hope you don't think I meant Washington, D.C. No, the same old corporate mentality of stripping any semblance of ethics from the work ethic still rules in that plutocratic roost. Rather than D.C., it's Washington State I'm talking about, specifically the progressive forces of Seattle, who've just produced a landmark $15 an hour minimum wage. Instead of just talking about the widening gap of inequality and wishing Congress might give a damn about the millions of Americans being knocked down, the people of Seattle are providing national leadership. We did it. Workers did this, Shama Sawant said. A member of Occupy Seattle, she's been the tenacious, articulate leader of a large grassroots coalition of low-wage workers called 15 Now, and she was elected to the city council last year by building the case for a $15 wage floor. In addition, Mayor Ed Murray campaigned last year for raising the minimum to $15, indexed to inflation. And this year, he pulled together a 24-member working group of labor and business interests, which has spent 4 months hammering out details of the local ordinance. On June 2nd, all 9 City Council members voted to adopt it. This is Jim Hightower saying, of course, the forces of corporate greed never sleep. And a Washington, D.C. group called the International Franchise Association is unleashing a pack of lawyers to sue the city, hoping a federal judge will nullify the will of local voters. So the political fight is not over. But the good people of Seattle have done all of us a big favor by moving the wage debate from the miserly, self-centered turf of the corporate bottom line to the moral high ground of social justice, where it belongs. Seattle is just the start of this movement.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor. All for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Voting expert Jan Leighley has a warning for Democrats. It isn't the rhetoric that will matter in defeating Republicans. It's the organizational efforts and door-to-door campaigning. And we welcome to the program Jan Leighley, whose research and teaching interests focus on American political behavior, voter turnout, media and politics, and the political behavior of racial and ethnic groups. She is co-author of the new book called Who Votes Now? Demographics, Issues, Inequality, and Turnout in the United States. Jan Leighley, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And nice to have you with us as well. Your book asks the question, who votes now? What's the answer, and what does it mean?
What we know the most about who votes now is actually similar to who's been voting in some respects for the past couple decades. The key factors are really education and income. The folks who show up at the polls on presidential election days are more highly educated and they are wealthier than the individuals who stay home. The change that we've seen in the past couple decades is we now have women more likely to vote than men, and blacks are actually more likely to vote than whites once you control for differences in class. And we've had some changes in age and turnout. The senior citizens, seniors, older individuals are now continue to vote, and they vote for a longer number of years where they used not to. Youth turnout has remained low, and amazingly so.
Why do you think the rich consistently vote more than the poor? I mean, one might think that the poor have more at stake in elections, right?
That might be the popular. Do the poor have more at stake? Are they is at stake meaning are the things that government does for them more essential to their survival? I think that's an assumption that's not necessarily true. The lives of wealthy people are inherently tied up with government regulation, government benefits, and public policies. And we also know that the difference is that political candidates and parties target the rich in their mobilization efforts. And that's mostly true for both Republicans and Democrats. And that's who we have most of the data on, that when those organizations go to mobilize voters, they aren't typically seeking to find people who have never voted and vote and get them to vote. They're finding people who they know have a track record of voting and reminding them to vote. So what is often considered mobilization efforts is really directed toward the top 40% of the income distribution. A good reason why the wealthy might vote more if they're the ones who are asked more.
Well, they're certainly asked for their money more, probably.
There's that asking as well.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes that just immediately, oh yeah, sure. Well, if I'm giving you money, I might as well vote for you. Well, you know, you often hear people talk about how, you know, the rich Republicans, the rich right, and all that kind of thing. But don't a lot of wealthy people vote for progressive candidates and issues, or is it just a case of not enough?
I think it's more of not enough. I think and our book doesn't focus on the kind of the vote choices and patterns on this. We know that wealthy folks are far less likely to support government redistribution efforts, and so that percentage difference in supporting those positions means if I'm going to bet on who a wealthy person is going to vote for, they're going to be less likely to vote for a progressive candidate than someone who is poor, right? So I think what you might be referring to, you know, what we might see in terms of journalistic coverage is we see kind of case studies or these wonderful dramatic illustrations of the wealthy person who, despite his or her wealth, you know, has a bleeding heart to do all these wonderful things for others and adopts a progressive mentality or policy position. That's hardly generalizable, I think, to, you know, the top part of the income group in the country versus the bottom.
We're speaking with Jan Leighley, co-author of the book called Who Votes Now? Demographics, Issues, Inequality, and Turnout in the United States. Jan, how can you tell that voters are more conservative economically than non-voters?
Well, what Jonathan Leighley and I do in our book is we look at a variety of public opinion questions that have been asked since the 1970s, and where nationally representative samples, individuals are asked their positions on various issues, on the role of government in guaranteeing jobs, government health insurance support, and other similar policies that we call redistributive in nature. The role of government services, right? How big a role should government have in providing services to people? So we ask individuals what their position is on that, and on those issues, as well as a variety of social issues and issues like foreign affairs. We ask them their positions on those. We compare, take the average of the wealthiest group of individuals on each of those issues and compare that to the poorest group on these issues and the income groups in between, and see substantial differences between the wealthiest and the poorest groups on the redistributive issues, like the role of government health insurance, providing services. And we don't see those differences in those other types of issues, the role of women, racial issues, foreign affairs, indistinguishable across income groups on those positions.
Do you see changes, though, given the Obama coalition of women, minorities, and retirees?
Well, we do see a bit of a blip, if you will. Jonathan Leighley and I, the work that we have only, unfortunately, goes until the 2008 election. We did a long span beginning in 72 through 2008. And we see a bit of a blip with youth turnout. We see a bit of an increase in African American turnout, but that's about it in 2008. The question is, will that continue, or what happened to that in 2012? We're at work on that question. But my concern is whether that, and this was a discussion in the 2012 election, of will the Obama campaign continue to mobilize and provide the infrastructure and support to bring voters to the polls, right? Whether that is sustained over the next 10 years or not is not clear. The blip, if you will, that increase in 2008 from some of those groups, it was higher in 2008 than what I've seen in public reports, media reports on the composition of the electorate, seemed to have fallen away. When that isn't the same kind of fine-grained analysis we do. But the question is, it is good if you get some new voters out there, but you have to keep those mobilization efforts going. and one election doesn't a trend make.
Mm-hmm. Are there any demographic groups, say younger voters, older voters, suburbanites, whose voting patterns have shifted dramatically in the last couple of elections, or at least those that you looked at?
The biggest changes that we see really have to do with age and the oldest age groups increasing their turnout rates, especially compared to 72. That level of turnouts, just simply didn't occur. So the big gap that has emerged, or a bigger gap emerges now between older age groups and younger age groups than we used to have. Women are more likely to vote than men. That's been the case for several elections now. And we certainly see a climb in, or an increase in black turnout, where it's the same as or exceeding white turnout, or Anglo turnout, if you will. Now, so those are the big changes that we see.
Yeah. As a political scientist, do you think that President Obama and New York Mayor Bill de Blasio's rhetoric about income inequality will make a big difference, if not in closing the gap, then at least in getting more low-income people to vote?
I don't think the rhetoric is what does it. I think it's the organization that does it.
Mm-hmm.
A part of what's changed in electoral politics over the past several decades has been this shift to the media and electronic messages kind of on the air, if you will. My sense is that is far less effective than the good old-fashioned door-to-door, neighborhood-based organization efforts where politics becomes a real face-to-face conversation, and where you have social connections linking people to the campaign or the election or election day. So I think it has to be more material than the rhetoric. Rhetoric is good entertainment and may send good signals. It might be the start of something good, but I think you have to have the follow-up with kind of the material support.
Well, people seem to listen to the negative rhetoric. Why don't they listen to positive rhetoric?
Well,
and I look at this. I mean, I think that President Obama and Bill de Blasio's their message about income inequality can be spun in a very positive way. We need to do these things. Here's what we can do, as long as you allow us to do them.
It can be spun positively.
But you still need to get out and knock on doors.
I think you still need to get out and knock on doors. Politics is entertainment. It's it can be to a lifestyle choice. It is not a primary requirement or essential activity in people's daily lives.
Yeah.
And so, income inequality, we have a culture where individuals tend to blame themselves or others for the circumstances they're in. So I just think you start with a skeptical group, and you start with a probably self-interested group, that what am I going to do? I'm going to work my hours during the day, take care of my family, and that attention to the political space and our political culture is secondary, right? And everyone can love, the inspiring campaign speeches and recreating the world and turning, inequality upside down. Inequality is a tough issue. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so once we get beyond the rhetoric, what do we mean by inequality? What are the possibilities of changing inequality? Is my inequality the same thing as your inequality? And then, so that can be exciting, maybe to progressives, maybe to Democrats. I don't know that Republicans really care that much about inequality. That frame, or for some, at least, the frame that inequality is not necessarily a bad thing.
Well,
right? Nothing
and that's,
ever gave,
and that's where I will disagree with Republicans, because I think it's a horrible thing. But, that's, I guess life can't be perfect, huh?
That's right.
If we want to change things, we got to get out there and as you say, knock on doors and politic the old-fashioned way. Yes,
and I think, some of those are the kinds of conversations and engagements where you're asking people to engage and be a part of the dialogue, right? And if that dialogue just happens among a small group of, people who are committed to inequality, that's, probably good in many respects. I think where the more helpful and hopeful conversation is where those conversations do start to happen across the aisle, right? Across groups, because no one's going to shove any problem or any solution down anyone else's throat these days, right? And I think part of what's happening in D.C. is a sense that no one, or in the federal government, no one is talking to each other about some of the, are there basics that we could agree to, or at least go part way on? And maybe if we're able to make some small steps by talking across the aisle, by shifting how we frame the issue, what we propose to do with it, then maybe we might see that some of this is indeed tractable.
Okay. Jan Leighley, co-author of the book Who Votes Now? Demographics, Issues, Inequality, and Turnout in the United States, has been our guest here on americasdemocrats.org. Jan, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks. It was good to be here.
Nice to have you with us as well. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press and his guest, Senator Bernie Sanders, who has introduced legislation to reform the Veteran Affairs Department.
Everybody said that after General Shinseki resigned, that was not going to fix the problems at the VA. We needed legislation for long-term reforms at the VA. Senator Bernie Sanders, chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, was the first one out of the box with such legislation just last Sunday. And yesterday, he and Senator John McCain came together on the Sanders-McCain bill addressing the problems of the VA. Chairman Sanders joining us on our news line this morning. Senator, always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Bill.
And, we have with us this morning one of the people who is probably pestering you all the time. You see him on the Hill, senior political reporter for the Hill newspaper, Alex Bolton.
Hey, Senator Sanders, how are you?
Good, Alex. How are you?
All right. So, Senator, tell us the thrust of your legislation that you and Senator McCain came together on yesterday.
Well, here's what the legislation does. It addresses the crisis that we're facing in that many parts of the country right now, veterans cannot get timely care. They're on waiting lines that are much, much too long. What this legislation does is say that if you are in such an area, if there is a very long waiting line, you will be able to go outside of the VA. You can go to a private doctor. You can go to a community health center. If you're near a military base, you go to a DOD. You can go to an Indian Health Service if you're in an area where those facilities exist. So that will allow veterans to access quicker health care. Second of all, what it does is says, look, we need more doctors, we need more nurses in VA facilities in certain parts of the country. No doubt about that to my mind. Mm-hmm. What this does is target $500 million to make sure that every VA facility in the country has enough doctors and nurses. What it also does is say that if you're living a long distance away from a VA facility, a medical center or a primary care facility, you will be able to go, if it's more than 40 miles, you'll be able to go into a private facility. Furthermore, what it does is allow construction to go forward on 26 major medical facilities in 18 states around the country. These are projects which have been on the drawing board for years. Funding has not been appropriated. We do that. We also increase accountability. We say to the Secretary, you can fire incompetent people, and we give him a flexibility that he did not have in the past.
Sounds like you covered the waterfront. Senator, quick question. If the wait has been too long and someone does go outside the VA system, their VA benefits still pay for that care?
Yes.
Whoa.
Absolutely. Look, here's the point. The point is, and let me reiterate this point. In my view, and I can tell you in Vermont that I think in most parts of the country, VA provides very high-quality care. And veterans tell us, their organizations tell us, independent surveys tell us. The major crisis that we're dealing with right now is that waiting periods in too many areas are too long, and that's what we have to address.
Access, right. Alex?
Hi, Senator. I just want to ask about the firing powers in the bill. Is this similar to what, or is it the same language that the House passed before the recess in terms of granting the Secretary more power to fire people?
No, it is not, Alex.
How's it different?
It's different in this sense. What I was concerned about, here are the issues. Right now, it is difficult to get rid of an incompetent or worse employee, somebody who may be dishonest or doing bad things. So you want to give the Secretary the flexibility to get rid of that employee. What the House said was very simple. You're fired. Gone. Now, the truth, though, is that what that does is take away all due process. What happens if a person is fired because of his or her sexual orientation or something else? What happens if a new president comes in and decides to fire 300 or 400 people for political reasons? So what we do is put in there a due process language which says, yes, the Secretary has the right to get rid of you immediately. You have a week in order to file an appeal, and the appropriate body, the Merit Protection Board, will rule on that within 3 weeks. So we provide some due process for those employees, but it's expedited.
Senator, as everyone has pointed out, and you have as well, these problems with the VA didn't start yesterday or didn't start when President Obama got in the Oval Office. They've been around a long time. You know, the old phrase, it takes a long time to turn around a battleship. With this legislation, how long do you think it's going to take to fix the VA?
I hope clearly as quickly as possible. I hope that we can, through these measures, through getting more doctors into hospitals where they are needed, giving vets the opportunity of going outside of the VA for timely care, we can deal with the immediate crisis. Longer term, we have got to determine what kind of staffing is needed in hospitals all over this country, what kind of resources are needed, what kind of management problems exist. And an argument has made, which I think has merit, that it may not, in certain parts of the country, it may not simply be lack of doctors and nurses, but the management capability of making sure that doctors are seeing enough patients, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. It's going to take a long time. It's a long term, but it is off to a good start. Congratulations, Senator, on this agreement you and John McCain reached yesterday. We'll be following the legislation with great interest, I'm sure, and talking to you about it again soon. Thanks so much, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Bill. Take care. Bye-bye.
Chairman Bernie Sanders of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Peter Galbraith, Jan Leighley, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.